Hello, and welcome to Race of Men. This is the fourth episode of Tuesday Afternoon Tea, where I discuss great English literature as well as other types of great literature, and I drink tea. I'm relatively new to the tea drinking art form, you might say, and I am slowly but surely acquaintancing myself with different types of teas, the English tradition of drinking an afternoon tea and what that entails, etc. Today I'll be drinking a white tea that was introduced to me. I had no clue that white tea actually existed. I thought they were just red, black, green herbal teas. White tea is completely foreign to me, so we'll see how it goes. I have some right next to me that's been steeping for a little bit, and we'll try that in a couple minutes. Today I'd like to revisit G.K. Chesterton with you. Considering that spring is almost here, it's just a couple of days away, and often when we think of the springtime, at least in my mind, I'm brought to some kind of musical or poetical inspiration from the newness of the life of spring. And so in this passage in G.K. Chesterton's Everlasting Man, he's going to be talking about something different than that. He's going to be talking about how you can't say religious forms were the predecessors to religion, because in that sense you're saying that religion brought, life to religion. It's putting the cart before the horse. Within this context of this passage that he says, talks about religion, he's going to make a metaphor about spring, or he's going to make a call back to how spring relates to poetry, you might say. So, getting right into it. To say that religion came from reverencing a chief or sacrificing at a harvest is to put a highly elaborate cart before a really primitive horse. It is like saying that the impulse to draw pictures came from the contemplation of the pictures of reindeers in the cave. In other words, it is explaining painting by saying that it arose out of the work of painters, or accounting for art by saying that it arose out of art. It is even more like saying that the thing we call poetry arose as a certain result of customs, such as that of an ode being officially composed to celebrate the advent of spring, or that of a young man rising at a regular hour to listen to the skylark, and then writing his report on a piece of paper. It is quite true that young men often become poets in the spring, and it is quite true that when once there are poets, no mortal power can restrain them from writing about the skylark. But the poems did not exist before the poets. The poetry did not arise out of the poetic forms. In other words, it is hardly an adequate explanation of how a thing appeared for the first time to say it existed already. Similarly, we cannot say that religion arose out of the religious forms, because that is only another way of saying that it only arose when it existed already. It needed a certain sort of mind to see that there was anything mystical about the dreams or the dead, as it needed a particular sort of mind to see that there was anything poetical about the skylark or the spring. That mind was presumably what we call the human mind, very much as it exists to this day, for mystics still meditate upon death, and dreams as poets still write about spring and skylarks. But there's not the faintest hint to suggest that anything short of the human mind we know feels any of these mystical associations at all. A cow in a field seems to derive no lyrical impulse or instruction from her unrivaled opportunities for listening to the skylark. And similarly, there is no reason to suppose that live sheep will ever begin to use dead sheep as the basis of a system of elaborate ancestor worship. It is true that in the spring a young quadruped's fancy may lightly turn to thoughts of love, but no succession of springs has ever led it to turn, however lightly, to thoughts of literature. And in the same way, while it is true that a dog has dreams, while most other quadrupeds do not even seem to have that, we have waited a long time for the dog to develop his dreams into an elaborate system of religious ceremonial. We have waited so long that we have really ceased to expect it, and we no more look to see a dog apply his dreams to ecclesiastical construction than to see him examine his dreams by the rules of psychoanalysis. It is obvious, in short, that for some reason or other these natural experiences, and even natural excitements, never do pass the line that separates them from creative expression, like art and religion, in any creature except man. They never do, they never have, and it is now, to all appearance, very improbable that they ever will. Now that is part of his everlasting man. He's developing his argument. First, I think, dealing with this evolutionary idea that religion is just an evolutionary function. It arose out of ancestor worship. Religion arose out of having to sacrifice at harvest time. And but he's saying to call religion as arising out of these religious forms is just to basically say religion is coming from religion. So you're just back at square one now. You haven't made any progress. It's like saying the arts came from a man gazing upon a painting in a cave. You know, the painting had to be there first, or the idea of the painting had to be there first. Then the painting comes. Likewise, when he talks about poetry, he says the poetic forms could not have existed before the poetry, but the poetry, gives life to the poetic forms. And I do like what he says about young men and the skylark, or young men and poetry. I'll read that again. It is even more like saying that the thing we call poetry arose as the result of certain customs, such as that of an ode being officially composed to celebrate the advent of spring, or that of a young man rising at a regular hour to listen to the skylark, and then writing his report on a piece of paper. It is quite true that young men often become poets in the spring, and it is quite true that when once there are poets, no mortal power can restrain them from writing about the skylark. I just do like this imagery of having the advent of spring be that which is the predecessor to poetry, you might say. That poetry didn't arise out of the poetic forms. It came from man's mind and how he sees the natural world, how he sees creation, how he's inspired by something like that. So that'll fit into my grander message for this episode. But first, let's take a sip of this white tea, see how it is. I've never had white tea before, like I said. I have no clue what to expect. It reminds me of chai a little bit. Yeah, it's not like green tea. It doesn't have that green tea twang to it, really. It's almost like a dumbed down or a watered down black tea, maybe, but it still has that chai essence to it. Moving on from Chesterton, I'd like to read you an actual poem from William Wordsworth. And I chose this poem because, yes, it is March, and the title is quite fitting. The title is Written in March. Subtitle, While Resting on the Bridge at the Foot of Brother's Water. But there's something I noticed about this poem that I would like to tell you, or that I would like to convey, something I would like to convey to you about how the nature of poetry, you might say. So I'll go ahead and read the poem to you, and then I'll elaborate on what I mean. The cock is crowing, the stream is flowing, the small birds twitter, the lake doth glitter, the green field sleeps in the sun, the oldest and youngest are at work with the strongest. The cattle are grazing, their heads never raising, there are 40 feeding like one. Like an army defeated, the snow hath retreated, and now doth fare ill on the top of the bare hill. The plowboy is whooping, anon, anon. There's joy in the mountains, there's life in the fountains. Small clouds are sailing, blue sky prevailing. The rain is over and gone. The thing I was telling you that I'd like to elaborate about with you is that this poem, it's a very simple poem. It's uh, Wordsworth here doesn't seem to be trying to do anything very complex. I mean, you have some deviation in the rhyme scheme as you progress. Like it begins with uh, an A B B type rhyme scheme where it goes crowing, flowing, twitter, then glitter. Then he says sun, but then doesn't follow it up with sun, not until a couple of lines later, where he finishes with one, finishes that part of the rhyme. But overall, it's not a very complex poem. Um, Even some of the lyrics here, if I were to say, uh, you know, what is the greatest work of Wordsworth? Maybe this wouldn't be even on the top 10. I'm not quite sure what Wordsworth's top poems would be ranked, but um, this poem, written in March, it's a very simple poem. And something about poetry is that it doesn't always have to be this complex, grandiose declaration of the most uh, intimate feelings, you might say. It doesn't have to be this compliment to like a complex form of writing. It doesn't have to be complex at all. Poetry can be something very simple, because I think poetry is a reflection of life itself. Poetry is a reflection of life put into words, is what I would say. So oftentimes, life isn't going to be beyond the simple, the mundane, or the routine. That's why if you watch a movie, no one can ever hope to be like someone in a movie if they want to be like someone. Because when you're shown a movie, most of the time you're just shown the highlights of a character. You're shown their peak moments. You're shown the most cinematic imagery of a character. But you're not shown the mundane day-to-day life. And as postmoderns, we tend to think of life in the terms of cinema. I think we imagine our lives in some sort of cinematic lens. We hope things will turn out in a movie-like way, when in reality, most of the time that you're going to live is in those mundane and simple times. And I think a poem can capture that simplicity. You don't need, the most elaborate words. He's not uh, reaching for the most. He's not trying to prove himself to be a master of the thesaurus, you might say. He's rhyming, defeated, retreated, ill, hill, mountains, fountains, you know, and all these rhymes, they're not so complex, but they drive at the core of a simpler idea. And maybe it's him resting by the bridge at the foot of Brothers Water that, he is experiencing this simple time and he wants to reflect that simplicity. So, my point is that, and going back to Chesterton saying that springtime often makes young men want to write poetry, my message to you is, whether you're a young man, old woman, it doesn't matter who you are. I think you should try your hand at writing poetry. Poetry is a great way, I think, of seeing uh, something in a different light. Maybe it's like capturing it in a different light so that you can see it and appreciate it in a different kind of way. Um, and maybe it's through the the use of poetry that something mundane can take on new life. How many seasons have you been through, as a person? But every spring, there's a newness to the feeling of spring, because you might say, survived the winter, survived the darkness and rain of winter, like Wordsworth is saying. That all the snow is gone, The spring has come, the light is finally here, the forsythia is in bloom in early March, uh, flowers, trees are getting their leaves back, and each spring we see spring in a new light. It's not the same exact thing happening over again, even though it's the same process. So I think it can be the same for how poetry can give life to just really anything in life, the mundane, the complex, the simple. It doesn't matter what it is. Try your hand at poetry. I think it'll be worthwhile. And for those who might say that poetry is not necessarily a very manly art, I have much to contend with you concerning that. Uh, Arguably one of the most manly men in all of Scripture is King David, and I mean he wrote many psalms. He was not afraid to uh, speak truly what his heart was desired to say towards his God, towards his circumstances. So I'd like to read for you Psalm 1. How blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stand in the path of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and his law he meditates day and night. He will be like a tree firmly planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. And in whatever he does, he prospers. The wicked are not so, but they are like chaff, which the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. And I'll read verse 3 for you again. He will be like a tree firmly planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither, and in whatever he does, he prospers. There's an idea there that the life you have, the life you might say give to others, the life you sacrifice and give unto the Lord, it's like a tree, and it has to be firmly rooted and planted. You'll see when spring comes, what trees are dead and what trees are not, based on what fruit they bring, or what trees need to be removed and reserved for the wrath of the fire, you might say, because they failed their function as trees. So I'd like to just leave those thoughts with you that poetry is something that can bring greater light to life circumstances. It can bring greater light to something as simple as a rushing stream, after a winter, or the fall line of a great river, um, you know, coming forth from all the snow from the mountains that's melted, carrying all that down into the sea. Poetry can be something uh, as small and simplistic as giving praise to uh, the simplicity of a flower, a small, beautiful flower. It can be something that praises the blooming of newness of life, or it can even be a lamentation of something that is passing away. So I'd like to leave those with you. Um, Please be encouraged to go write some poetry, get outside, be inspired, and most of all, no matter what you do, give yourself unto God, and He will establish you. All right? God bless.